Welcome back to KTN Weekend Prime, the point of news. If you're just joining us, the hashtag tonight is rape culture, and the reason for that is we're discussing something that went viral online this past week, at least here in Kenya. An audio was leaked of what seems to have been a sexual encounter between two people, and in that sexual encounter, the lady whose voice can be heard, as well as a man's, the lady tells the man at various intervals to stop, that she has had enough. And the reason we're discussing it is because of the reaction that it elicited, mostly positive, praising the man's sexual prowess. The hashtag, of course, was Mollis, but tonight our hashtag is rape culture. We're discussing the wider issue around that. And in studio to discuss this with me, I've got Jade Minor from the Trust for Indigenous Culture and Health, running a program on sexual reproductive health rights, as well as Mark Kai, who are not a new face to KTN, from Nendo Online Research and Strategy Company. Right, so Jade, ladies first. You heard the audio. What was your first reaction when you heard it? Or perhaps I should ask, when you saw that trend and you saw how people were reacting to it, how did you react when you heard the audio itself?
First of all, when I woke up to that morning, I see all this conversation on social media about Mollis this, Mollis that, memes of people saluting Mollis, and I was thinking, okay, who's this new Makmende in town?
Yeah.
And so later during the day, when I asked my colleague, have you seen this Mollis, because it was clearly a trend for a long time, and she told me it's an audio, and she put it for me to listen. And to tell you the truth, I couldn't go through it to the end. I was really disgusted. I felt pain for this woman, and I was thinking, I just put myself in her shoes, and I thought, at the point where she says stop, at that point, if Mollis is a gentleman, Mollis stops. And in my mind, it just clicks that this is rape. This man, we are listening to a man raping a woman. And the conversation there later on social media, of when you say this and people are saying it's not rape because they seem to know each other, is pretty ridiculous for me.
All right, Mark, let's get you in here. Same question. What was your reaction when you saw this trend and perhaps even listened to that?
Sure. So thanks, John Allen. It's tough to be neutral, I think, on a topic like this. So even when discussing what the facts are versus what opinions are, it's a very dicey and very very gray area in general. It's very hard to call it black and white. Now, in my case, I heard about it from a WhatsApp group that I'm part of, and that's where I believe, for the most part, it went around. If you think about how easy it is to send around audio clips, you can record one yourself and forward it to someone. So that's where it broke and went viral, in a sense. And from that, the debate, I'll be honest, at the first listen and the subsequent messages was not, the first reaction was not rape. At least it didn't seem so in at least two of the groups that I'm in, and certainly from the people that I watched discussing. It happened to trend on Twitter in Kenya online the following day, throughout the morning, and this is during the middle of this week. Now that clip, the first reaction for a lot of people was around humor, and I can tell you, John Allen, there was this phrase that the woman says when she's asking the gentleman to stop. She says, "I surrender," and her accent at the time is what people have gone on to make quite a bit of fun around, and made it the subject of many of the jokes and sarcasm we've seen, to the extent that even brands and companies, seeking an opportunity for relevance and real-time marketing, as it's called, actually jumped on that, only to realize later that genuinely there was more to this than met the eye, and then the questions around rape, around consent, around privacy, to be honest with you, have all come, and for, I think, to share my personal opinion, I think it left me with more questions than answers. Let me say it like that.
All right. That's definitely something that a lot of people have talked about with respect to the clarity of the audio.
Sure.
But at certain points you can hear the lady saying, you know, I've had enough, I surrender,
Sure.
that sort of thing. Jade, what constitutes consent? And can consent be withdrawn at any point within a sexual encounter?
I think consent can be verbal or non-verbal, but I think for two people who are having a sexual encounter, consent can be implied, but consent can also be withdrawn at any particular time. The fact that I consented and we went to your house, I can get to the house and no longer want to have a sexual encounter with you. Consent can be withdrawn even within um, at any one point, because very many other reasons can make a person withdraw their consent. The fact that I would want us to look at sex as other things that we do in life. For example, if I said, I want to come to your house and watch a movie, and we get to your house, and in the middle of the movie I'm like, this is a boring movie, I do not want to go, or this is a violent movie, I would want to stop. Wouldn't you just let us stop or let me walk away? Why isn't it the same for sex? And also the issue of, I think people feel like this lady then owes Morris. And I think it's a wrong concept if we think that people owe each other sex. If you buy me something, then I owe you sex. There is no one particular point where you owe anyone sex for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Also, I think the other important bit that we need to also see is that for people who are in a what brought out for me is the culture that we have put of sexual prowess being the length of time a man lasts. I know there is a problem probably of too short a time, but you see that there has been cases of young people like teens using Viagra because they believe there is a wrong conception of what sex is or what pleasure is, and people are pushed to inhuman things.
Inhuman things, and perhaps that's something we should stick with for a moment. That Mollis or Morris was a hero in this scenario. That his prowess was the one that's being praised, and all of these memes came out about that. What does that say about perhaps our own conceptualizations about sex and how it played out online? Jade, I'll start with you, then we can come to Mark.
I think, first of all, it's how we have been socialized. Growing up, women are taught on how to please a man. Meanwhile, men are taught on how to be heroic, how to take her by force, and this, you find that nobody teaches the men on how to be a good lover. As a woman, I am aware that at the point where your mind switches off sex, any encounter after that is painful and can sometimes be injurious. You would find that probably this woman was not able to walk the next day. How can that be good sex? How can we put that as a measure of good sex? That is one. Two, women are taught to be docile, or to, as a good woman, you don't show you don't show your sexual urge. For that reason, women sometimes, even when they say no, they mean yes, which is a wrong concept. Especially
that's something that's come out a lot online. That a lot of men have been saying, like, look, she said no, but she actually means yes in a situation like that. Sort of explaining away Morris's actions. Is this something that you find, especially within the sexual and reproductive health world, that victims of rape, victims of sexual abuse, have their actions explained away by other people and perhaps not by themselves, and thus they feel ashamed to talk about it?
Yeah, because people want to always second guess what she was thinking. And our society has cultured that thought that women always say yes or say no when they mean yes. I'd like to put a challenge to men. Take the no for the answer. Act on it. If she tells you to continue, continue. If she says no again, even if jokingly, stop. Let's teach each other that words mean something, because this confusion about, let's not have a confusion of when should I interpret the no for a yes, the yes for a no. Let's treat the words as they are.
Yeah. All right, Mark, let's get you in on this. The trend itself speaking to something deeper. Do you feel that the conversation is happening in as large a space as this hashtag occupied?
So I think one of the things to just give ourselves some context around this isn't the first time that we've had a similar kind of audio tape, and certainly one that's captured the city's attention and imagination and discussion and polarized people. You have a sense, if someone was so bold as to say that Kenyans exhibit a kind of voyeurism, where they delight almost in watching and getting access to such private information. If to just take one of the various cases and points, if you go back and you look at various radio stations that tend to be the most popular here, some of the most popular segments tend to be the ones that you have basically the moment before, maybe a few hours before an encounter like this would take place. So is somebody cheating? What's the context? Is somebody caught out? More than that, you even had one of a gentleman who I think went by the name of Muturi. That being one which you can contrast with this time now. The difference then was that aired on a radio station first, and the discussion was a bit more controlled. Here, people were literally that fly on the wall, that person in the room. I think it's really tough when you're put in a position where you have to make a judgment call when you don't know the moments before what audio we're listening to. You don't know the moments after, so to speak. So without a context, it is difficult. Who recorded it between the two of them or someone else, a third party? All these questions, I think, leave us with, if you're to look at it and seek out facts and grounds to make a conclusion, it is difficult. That hasn't stopped anyone from having an opinion. And with Kenyans Online, just to give some context, when there's this idea that there's social media as we know it, some of these spaces where we convene and interact, and there's what people call dark social, which is when, if you look to the olden days, whether it's post-election violence or any other time, some of the most divisive messages were sent as forwards of SMSs. They were sent as forwards of emails. And in the same way, people will take sensationalist or very explicit, if you like, images and so on, and forward them that way. In this day and age, it's WhatsApp. WhatsApp's the country's biggest social network by any means, if you choose to classify it as that. And by the time it came to Twitter, one thing that's characteristic of Kenyans on Twitter is that they will often take turns at creating the most sarcastic or witty or creative response. And with those liberties, if you were to search for this trending topic now, what you'll find are some of the most on the edge responses, right? Because these are the ones that really got people riled up. They got people excited. They had people laughing. And as you can imagine, just so you have a bit of context, majority of online users in this country are male, to a tune of 60, in some cases 70%, depending on where in this country you go. So you have a large audience that's mostly male interacting and shaping part of this discussion, and therefore much of what you've seen as the general sentiment from the nation would lean on the side that puts Mollis on a pedestal and describes his his prowess and what have you, while neglecting this aspect of consent and of rape and of the real questions it makes us ask. Some people, I'll say, have actually taken it and said, well, look, Mark, because you cannot speak categorically to what happened in the moments before or after, that justifies both the jokes and, of course, the concern that comes, which, to be fair, is still a worthwhile point, though it's difficult because we don't have enough conclusive evidence to make
evidence and context to be able to discuss this. But nonetheless, perhaps the sentiment, the overwhelming sentiment that emerged from this is that there was a sexual encounter that took place, and like you said, perhaps the people who are responding to this are indicative of one part of society responding to one interpretation of the same.
I might just even add this, and I was mentioning this to Judge just before we got on air. There is also a secondary channel of people, because if you can imagine Twitter as the global town square, anybody with a voice can speak and actually get the opportunity to do so. I've seen some very eloquent and very well thought out arguments defending the woman in her position and her ability to say no and have it mean something in this exchange. I think that's really the power of social media now. In hindsight, what you'll see are the more popular things, but certainly in the moment, what punctuated the discussion was some very well thought out points of view from people who lean towards identifying themselves as feminists, people who were just people who just care about women, and women themselves, of course, contributing greatly to the discussion. That to me is one of the benefits of this whole debate, is the fact that we can sit here now and discuss this, and more importantly come to a point where we hopefully revisit what are some of these first principles around, you know, two people and what consent is.
All right, most definitely, and that's what we're going to be coming to right after dealing with the deep-rooted negative masculinities breeding rape culture, and that's what we want to start to get into with respect to what happened with that video, with that audio rather. Jadida, let me get you in on this. When you see the kind of trends that we have online, especially around sexual content, what are your thoughts around how we will manage the message on sexuality, especially perceptions around women? Women are constantly being objectified online, and that seems to be the rage now. How do we manage this?
First of all, I think the sad bit is how happy we are to share this, further victimizing or re-victimizing the victim. Like, for example, even these photos with kids, their whole nakedness, their faces there, and then you happily share that with your friends. If we just stop that, if the people who feel that you are the responsible adult, do not share that. Do not be the person who sends it viral, because then this person cannot leave their house. They feel such a victim that they know everyone has seen exactly what it is that is being shared. So if we can, first of all, stop sharing that. Two, be the voice of reason. I think most of the time it's the people who make the funny jokes who are busy and tweeting the whole day, and the voices of reason read and shake their heads and move on.
So there is no voice of reason that comes in and steps in and sort of intervenes. Perhaps another story that came out this week was from the students in Kirinyaga who were arrested, and that picture, those pictures also went viral on WhatsApp. And we had a bit of commentary about that right before we went to break, with someone sharing that picture of that young girl. How do you stop something like this in a generation, in a space, especially the internet, that seems to thrive on sharing and commenting about sexual content?
Sure, I think John Allen, let's also keep in mind that this week has been a memorable one for more than one reason. So rightly, we have this audio of a sexual encounter between two people. We're not entirely sure of who they are and the context, but we have an opinion on that. We also have these pictures taken by an officer in uniform of what seems to be a teenager or somebody in high school. Very compromising pictures with them as close to nude as it gets, and no blurring of the photographs, so people not exactly exercising even at some level a sense of personal judgment to protect the identity of this person. On top of that, just to now throw everything up in the air, you had Kenyans on Twitter, online and offline, raise 6 million shillings for a gentleman who had brain cancer. So you have all of these things characterizing the same constituency of Kenyans online. Now the challenge here is that you cannot regulate, you cannot necessarily curate, you can't prescribe what people are going to do. The same way it took just a retweet to turn what was an article by a writer called Jackson Biko, known more affectionately online as Biko Zulu, and people seeing, well, I've contributed in some small way, my click matters. At the same time, somebody takes the image of this young lady and shares it in a WhatsApp group or in a message, and what they don't realize is that it's the same action in both cases, but the impact is different, because this is the identity of somebody who now has an online shadow that they had no point in creating, that someone else has furthered, and that actually will affect their reputation, certainly their ability to be hired and control their image online in the days, weeks and months to come. Now that, to capture in a phrase, the internet never forgets. Not for the gentleman who's going to get surgery now as a result of the contributions of people across the nation, not for the people who are the subject of a discussion from this audio tape, who might not even necessarily come forward because of what that might mean and the victimization that they might subject themselves to come out, and lastly on this side, I guess the circumstances that I think all of them maybe can be characterized, certainly these last two, as eg- eg- as a continual series of examples around Kenyans' fascination with being voyeurs, with observing from afar, when they have no direct attachment to protecting the identity of someone. Well, that's the reason Mollis has been put on a pedestal. You don't know him, all you know is this fictional idea around him. Maybe that's part of what, in a completely different sense, I'm going out on a limb, may have made one of what is Africa's first global trending topics in 2010, Makmende. People actually have associated Mollis, this fictional idea of this man that people can't really put a hold on, but has this elevated masculine status, and that going worldwide in 2010, and now where you have, I guess, the same circumstance where people in their minds will create the image they want and share that, and provided they're persuasive enough, can get someone to share that, and it's a multiplying effect. It's a shame that it works for good and bad, but at the end, that's what it is. I think a tool and a channel, and it's the emphasis you put in. But maybe to end with Jed's point, there's a lot of people who see this. They maybe clearly disagree with what's out there, but they choose to say nothing. And that is probably where much of the problem might come, is that the voices that have dominated the debate aren't necessarily the ones that can bring the most nuance to it, but they're the ones who at times will play to the gallery. And I mean, what do they have to lose, right? This is clicks, and these are bits and bytes on the internet. It's not the real world.
And these are moments that people seem to think, sort of fade off. But like you say, you create shadows, and the internet never forgets. But you raise an interesting point about the internet being a tool. Jadida, let me get you in here, because tools are used for good and for bad, right? And on the internet, the shareability of hypersexual content and content that leads us into a rape culture that perhaps we don't even see is not being challenged. Who's responsible for creating a counter narrative? And this is can be applied across different scenarios, even with terrorism. The reason why ISIS is becoming such a big challenge for the United States and the people who are fighting ISIS is because of their presence online and their ability to get people behind their message. With respect to rape culture, the kind of objectification that we have seen online, who's responsible for giving us that counter narrative that is persuasive enough for people to actually step in and say no?
I think we are all responsible. I would say that I am glad I've seen a few bloggers write the story on the side of the woman. But you see, because we are voyeurs, we are not sharing this as much as we shared the clip. There are such positive information on articles out there questioning consent, questioning what rape is. Because, John, I think also there's the confusion of when is rape. I think at the point where the woman says no, or the man, or the child, or whoever it is, and the other person continues, it is abuse, and if it is of a sexual nature, it is rape. So when we have this space, we should look at the glass half full. Okay, we have this situation right now. This has gone viral, and as we have just said, we cannot curate it, so we can't take it back. How can we use to have the conversation within the online space, within our homes, within our WhatsApp groups, and really have the conversation? Is this heroic? Is this man who you are looking up to be? Do you want to be Mollis? Do you want to be that man who moves on despite what the woman feels or wants, or and do you want your child to be that man? Do you want your child to date that man or marry that man?
So outside, sorry to cut you short, but outside of that conversation, of course, there's a term that we're using in our hashtag tonight, which is rape culture. And rape is a very stigmatizing and polarizing word, right? And even when we put this online, we got a lot of flack for using the term rape culture. But perhaps to explain what rape culture is in the context of the memes, in the context of what we saw online, what do you think it is?
I think rape culture is the culture that we have cultivated and we are fanning right now, where we do not recognize consent, or we do not understand what it is, and as a society we have actually gone to the extent where we think that women are not capable of either giving consent, or they, like, the idea that they would say no when they mean yes. And then we have now normalized it to the extent that when it happens, we can't recognize it if it was right in front of our faces. And that's why anyone would feel so judged or so wrong for that word being used, because they realize they do it. They realize that actually there's a person who commented on my page and said, if this clip is of a rape, 99% of Kenyan women have been raped. It is a sad reality that that's probably true.
Yeah.
Because when the Sexual Offences Act went to Parliament, the parliamentarians could not understand how you can say there can be rape in marriage. There is rape in marriage, there is date rape. Because there is the assumption that once you've given consent for eternity. That there is no space for you to have a day where you no longer want to consent to whatever it is that you consented to. So as a society, we have gotten to the point where it is not even a black or white.
Yeah.
We have got no lines. It's such a gray area that we have got no idea what rape is, and we perpetuate it knowingly or unknowingly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mark, where are the spaces that these discussions are taking place online with respect to making that nuance known to the public? Do you know of any bloggers, any people who've been trying to push this agenda? And how then do you make it, again, to use the word within this context, sexy? How do you make it catchy? How do you make a conversation around something so serious that a lot of people do without knowing catchy online?
Sure. I think part of what our research has at Nendo has shown us is that much of what goes viral, I'm not a big fan of that word, but and dominates what is now popular culture on social networks like Twitter, and certainly the ones that feed off of it, like Instagram and WhatsApp, these visually driven social networks. That content, much of what tips and gets to large audience, is generally shared by this very small core constituency of it's this 20% in charge of 80% of what you see out there, the jokes that you laugh at, and on any given day the materials you may be consuming and finding funny, humorous, and interesting.
Yeah.
Now, the key here would be to incentivize them or to approach and influence their point of view to share it. And maybe if I was to give you a case in point, now we've heard of many issues around cancer. People are familiar with it. People have been touched personally. I certainly have, and many people across this great nation. But what would compel a total stranger to help another stranger? And that was essentially the case that I believe it's the Africa Cancer Foundation had, and they went to somebody who forms part of this 20%, a storyteller, somebody with his own set of very loyal followers. That's the gentleman by the name of Jackson Biko. This is an example of where you get total strangers to care to pass on and to amplify a message that has nothing to do with them personally. They're not personally invested in it, whichever way it goes, but their endorsement of it, their support of it matters. And that's where, if we go back to this point around when some of the most important voices go silent, which means that they are fully informed, they have formed an opinion, and yet they choose not to express it. That is a case where you have essentially 2/3 of it, but you're missing that final third to complete it and actually shape and mold opinions to members of the public, because many people do consume content from this small audience. Maybe to take even a stab at your previous question around whose responsibility is it, it's if you're a parent right now watching this broadcast, everybody in your household has a blue screen or some kind of electronic device. Kids these days have tablets and know how to use them before they necessarily know how to read, write, and spell, right? That's the age we're living in of digital natives. And when they get raised by those devices and not necessarily by the people that they're surrounded with, when the questions that they might have are posed to their peers and back to these devices, anybody in this country right now is 2 clicks away from what some would consider very questionable content, right? What others might interpret as entertainment, and what some would call sexually explicit outright.
How big is this, Mark, just as you carry on with your point, how big is this with respect to the sharing of this kind of content, you say we're 2 clicks away, but is there any data? Are there any statistics on the sharing of sexually oriented content?
There are. I I think what I might say in response to that is much of even the advances that have come by way of technology have come from the adult entertainment industry. You might be surprised, things like VHS, CDs, DVDs, even the internet and streaming. So that, because that dominates a large percentage, we're talking arguably I want to safely say more than half of the time that people are spending online.
Yeah.
That itself is a statement to us about the kind of society we're in, because if that's not acknowledged and discussed in offline forums, let's say, then what is the effect of that, and how is that affecting us? We're sitting here discussing this one case in point, but as I said, even on actual Kenyan radio stations, things that have come as close to this and just veered just before, because there's an editor and somebody's job is on the line, and this is a public broadcast station, but people will express their outrage, and social media has been that place over the last 3, 4, 5 years where people have been called into account for this. So what I'm encouraged by is that the audience stays silent no longer. Now in this case, they've stayed pretty split down the middle around a large number of people, very many I might add, feeling that hey, this was a harmless clip, and then of course the opinion that hey, let's actually look at the facts here, let's look at the fact that no was said, and people making great points either way. What we've seen is that I think here and going forward, you cannot have a moment like this, provided that there is context, that people cannot make a judgment and bring some kind of outcome from it. And it's just, I think, the way that we don't have that, again, that context of who these people are, the scenario they were in, for us to make a final conclusive judgment. Because if that was there, I think people would, people aren't unreasonable, certainly not online, at least when they're not choosing to be unreasonable. And in that case, we would actually have broad consensus, I imagine, and at least a way forward.
All right, Jadida, final thoughts from you with respect to our subject today. You had a far more absolute opinion on what went on in that audio clip. What would your takeout be from this past week in terms of the discussion that went online?
I would say I was disappointed by Kenyans, especially on the day that this clip came, because there was a lot of glorification of what I believe was rape. And I think, looking back, maybe it's to look at the glass half full and take it as a teaching moment, and that we actually do this. We do this in our sitting rooms right now, if you're watching this. Thank you, John Allen, for providing one more space to have the conversation. Let's have the conversation.
All right, great. Thank you very much for joining us, Jadida Maina, as well as Mark Kaigwa. Interesting discussion, one that, of course, it could keep going, and it has been going online, and one that we hope will continue to be had with respect to what happened, with respect to that clip, and the issues surrounding it, whether we can nuance these discussions. Like Mark said, it's the same space in which the Mollis audio trended, that the 1 milli for Jadudi trended, and an enormous statement about hope and about the power of words to either build or destroy. Keep your views coming in on our hashtag tonight. That's Rape Culture. We'll be back in a moment, and we'll be sampling some of them at the end of the broadcast. I know I told you that we had some videos that we wanted to share. Unfortunately, due to a technical hitch, we can't share any of them, but the conversation continues on Russia on KTN Home. They're discussing the same topic, the Mollis clip, as well as the bigger issues on a music show. Pretty brave of them. Back after the break on KTN Weekend Prime.